Welcome to Transformational Psychology. My name is Ryan Holsapple. I created this podcast because I believe that human beings have the capacity to transform and live deeply meaningful lives. My podcast is based on two pillars, education and transformation. The educational branch allows us to explore the cutting-edge psychology of transformation and many important theoretical ideas. Monologues, interviews with experts, and transformational concepts are presented for the audience to engage with and reflect on. I also believe it is of the utmost importance that people have practical transformational tools for making real-life changes. So this podcast still provides applicable and digestible guidance to complement the theoretical component. It is my hope that this podcast offers education and transformational guidance to a world that is seeking meaning and connection. Today I have for you Dr. Carole Shumate in a conversation about Jungian Typology. Dr. Shumate has taught at places like Yale University. She's teaching the course that I'm in right now on personality types in Jungian theory at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Dr. Shumate has requested that each student meet with her so that she can go through a line of inquiry and help us decide what type we are. For those of you who don't know, the Jungian types are based on two primary attitudes, extroversion or introversion. Depending on how you're born, what you come in the world with, you're bent towards being more introverted or extroverted. There's also four functions that go off of that: thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling. And that's kind of how you manifest your introversion and extroversion, how they play off of each other. So you have the functions and you have the primary attitude. Those work together to create your type. Now, I'm just getting into this stuff. I have resisted typology for a while. The reason I've resisted typology is because things that are based on grouping people together and how we're all so similar tends to leave out how we're all unique. And because I am so committed to the subpersonality model and understanding how we're manifesting unique personalities and dispositions into the world, ways of seeing, ways of perceiving, ways of acting, ways of feeling, talents, coping styles, intelligence, athletic abilities, etc. We all come in with these different circuits and they manifest in very specific and unique ways, and they're not all universal. And there's not just this categorical thing of types per se in the individual. It's much more nuanced than that in my experience. However, I totally underestimated the value of using this assessment and using this typology perspective to understand my individual self and to add insight into my subpersonality perspective. And so my mind has opened. My mind was a little closed before. My mind has opened a little bit, and I was impressed with Dr. Shumate. She did such a good job with me, and I want to share this vulnerable session that's a little bit self-indulgent. And you know why it's self-indulgent? Because it's about me, and it wasn't supposed to be a podcast. But I thought it was so useful that we would post the last 30 minutes or so of it, where she just at the point where she nails what my type is. And at that point, it gets really interesting, and the conversation carries on with some unique insights into my type, which is called an ENTP, which we'll get into here shortly in the interview. Also, I just think I should point out that Jung himself understood the limitations of classification and typology. He says, classification does not explain the individual psyche. Nevertheless, an understanding of psychological types opens the way to a better understanding of human psychology in general. Well, Dr. Jung, I have an open mind, and I'm curious to see where this goes and how this maps on to the curiosity I have about genetics and subpersonalities. And I suggest you all who want to know more about that subpersonality approach, go back to episode number 1 of this podcast, and you will see exactly how I view that. I give an hour-long talk to a group of students, and I think it was received well and understandable and digestible. So you can go there to find. I think this model that Jung has presented and that people like Dr. Shumate have built on offers a road to the beginning of individuation. And it's only a beginning, because generalization and classification can only get you started on understanding yourself. The road of self-understanding is deeply personal. And nobody can tell us who we are about ourselves. Nobody can give you the great reading of your deep intrinsic nuances that you can get through your own self-reflection, your own meditation, your own commitment to being you. So this is a great beginning in my view. And I felt liberated because it was validating to have someone say, Ryan, look, you have certain skills, you have certain talents, you have a way of being in the world that is so natural to you. And then you have certain things that just drive you nuts. And this is what they are. And by God, Dr. Shumate nailed it. And I was impressed with the robustness of the model's ability to get something right. Enjoy this discussion with Dr. Carole Shumate.
Which would you find more repugnant, to give an impromptu speech, or to have an IRS audit?
Oh God, not even close. I detest taxes and anything that asks me to go into numbers.
Okay.
I hate it.
Okay.
I'm not a math guy. I've never been a math guy.
I think we have your type.
Okay.
I think we have it.
By the way, I'm a podcaster. Speaking impromptu is what I love to do.
Okay. Okay.
I can go unscripted and make somewhat of a coherent message, but I cannot coherently look at my accounting.
That is great. That's perfect.
Okay, good.
Now,
okay.
Let me tell you.
I should write this
what
down.
Your reported type is. Well, I forgot to tell you I started recording this, but if you don't.
I love it. I don't care at all.
I can even share the recording with you. But
great.
The reported type, I think, is not your true type, but it's got 3 letters correct. So it's almost there. It's
okay.
Really got the dominant and the auxiliary function, but they probably need to be switched. Your reported type on the PTI is INTP, which is introverted thinking, capital T, little I. That's the intellectual function, right?
Okay.
With extroverted intuition, capital N, little e. Now, what is very clear to me is that it's clear to me that you really are not an INTP, that you are an ENTP. So in fact, you have those functions reversed. You have extroverted intuition on top,
okay,
and introverted thinking auxiliary. So both are very strong. I mean, they're, but it makes a difference what's on top, because it determines the inferior function.
Okay, so I'm an extroverted. What does the P stand for?
ENTP. The P stands for, it's complicated. Perceiving, but it really means perceiving function, but that's a little crazy. But let's just talk about extroverted intuition as a perceiving function.
So I'm an extroverted intuitive perceiver.
Let's not.
Sorry, I'm totally.
Not that way. Let's say extroverted intuition first, NE first, PI second. Shorthand for shorthand.
Okay.
And ENTP, the total profile, I will give you a mnemonic way to remember that. My personal term for the ENTP is entrepreneur. They are very entrepreneurial. They're the mavericks of the type chart. They drive their teachers crazy.
Yeah, I will tell you that many teachers do not find me very pleasant.
Yeah, they always have this, difficulty with, they go through this difficulty, and they're so intellectual, and the teachers, elementary school teachers are not particularly intellectual, so they can't they don't know how to deal with that, and they just see little ENTPs as smart-ass kids.
Yes. Yes.
So, but what happens is, and they're very independent.
Yes.
They're so independent. They're the mavericks in the type chart. They are out there doing their own thing, and they have these big ideas, tremendously imaginative. So they think of things that nobody else has thought about. And this is what gives them that entrepreneurial spirit. They can go out and set a path, be a pioneer. And then what happens is other people follow them.
Yeah.
So they are not the kind of leader that tells other people what to do. They're the kind of leader that just makes their own path and other people decide to follow.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. Yeah.
And what really clinched it for me is that INTP's the inferior function is introverted sensation, capital S, little I, and that's all about numbers, all about archives.
Oh my God, I hate it. Introverted sensation.
Yes.
Is my inferior function. Got it.
Yeah.
And that's really the numbers and archives and
and memories and details, little details. So losing track of details.
I hate details. That's Victoria's another pet peeve of hers. This might be the worst, is that I don't pay attention to details.
Right.
Oh gosh, she hates that.
Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing, introverted sensing is such an interesting function. It monitors the internal environment, whether we're talking about that, and that means the house. So it's kind of like the Hestia function, the Hestia goddess of the house, or the files, or the mental files in your head, and also your body. It monitors your body. So it's an internal facing function, but it's sensory, so it's material things. It's material, so it's a very embodied function. But it is, every mathematician, every math teacher, they all have an introverted sensing. Most of them have an introverted sensing function up high in their type code. So when it's in that fourth or inferior position, the way it manifests is, I'll give you an example. My brother-in-law has ENTP preferences. He's a brilliant biotech person. He's worth millions. He's founded companies that do gene therapy.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's really.
I need to know more, because I'm very interested in genetics.
He devised a process that is now used by everybody who does gene therapy. It's called it's AAV, adenoviral therapy. And, when he was in grad school, he found this little virus that was sort of similar to the common cold in that it's pretty ubiquitous, but it's benign. And so he used it as a vector for getting new genetic material. And he spent years doing this, and now he's like really cured Duchenne muscular dystrophy and a number of other genetic diseases. He particularly wants to cure the orphan diseases, because pharmaceutical firms don't put any money to those because they can't make money on them. So he's got a big effort in orphan diseases.
Amazing.
And but here's the thing about Richard. He doesn't care what people think about him, right? And he's off doing his own thing, right?
Right.
So his introverted sensing function, I can remember going over to his house, and kitchen table would just be piled with bills, letters, checks. There were checks in there. Once he forgot to, he didn't bother. I think he just didn't bother to renew his driver's license. So his driver's license was taken away. So he had to get drive him to work. And then he had a van at one time, and it was so filled with junk food wrappers.
Yes.
That he actually could barely see out of it. And he just so hated the idea of having to spend time cleaning that out, that he put it up for sale, and the deal was, as is, you have to take it as is. I'm not cleaning it.
Wow.
It was sold to somebody who bought it with all the junk food wrappers in it.
Wow.
I mean, really up to the roof.
That's
really,
amazing. Yeah.
Look, I mean, he would look like, you might look at that and you think, oh my God, he's a hoarder. That's not true. He just can't be bothered.
Yeah. See, I can relate to a lot of that. For me, I try to keep surfaces clean and I try to keep appearances up, like my house is clean, but you might find some drawers that are
Right,
just,
that are stuffed.
oh, they're stuffed. And it's like, I've come to find like that I need a clean environment to feel sane, but like I don't care if there's a drawer full of miscellaneous crap, or I don't care that there's weeds growing out in my backyard right now. It just doesn't. The only reason I care is if the neighborhood bothers me about it. So
Right.
that I can so relate to that. And I have a pile right here of checks that I've checked months ago.
Oh
That
my
I'm
God, that is
just
so typical.
sitting,
You know,
but they're sitting there like they're in a pile and they're not like gross and out there,
right.
but
And
like
you
I
know,
might be a
you
little different
listen
than
to them,
Richard,
but
but
not right now, because now you have a big idea that you have to deal with.
exactly. That's exactly how I am. Yeah. So I can relate to a lot of what you said about him with a little nuances. I think I've had to develop like detail function, like even to write a good paper for Pacifica, for example.
Yes. Oh my God.
Like, I have to have the citations. I can't just say what I have to say and leave. I have to have the proper structure. And so
Yeah.
that I've had to develop that inferior function a little bit, but it's not anytime I can get away with not doing it, I will,
Yes. Right.
basically. So
Yeah,
I can thank
Richard
you for
is
pointing that out.
now he's able to just delegate this to everybody around him, so he doesn't he never had to, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, he had to write papers, and he was always trying to get his students to write the papers for him, and it was a nightmare.
That's amazing.
He would, he would like, it would be at the 11th hour, he'd be working on a grant proposal, and then the deadline would pass, and he'd call him up and say, I need another day, and they would always give it to him.
Wow.
They wouldn't do that for anybody else.
That's amazing.
I mean,
right. By the way, Victoria takes my junk drawers and organizes them sometimes, which is very helpful. So she's my intuitive sensing.
Yes, so that's perfect.
Right.
No, you have delegated your inferior function to her, which is a very, very good thing to do with a partner. That's called projecting the Emma function onto the loved one, and then it's really good, because Jung says if we don't project the anima, it becomes morbid. So that is a really good first step, both in a relationship and in yourself, and then you value the other person for that, and somehow it brings you around to eventually you can integrate it more.
Wow.
But the first step is projection.
Yeah.
Surprisingly.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have thought. Well, this is great. I feel really good about this. Let me tell you about INTPs, which was your test. Your report came back as INTP, and it's very similar. But INTPs also have trouble in school. The teachers never appreciate their intellect and don't like, kids that are smarter than they are and all of that. Mm-hmm. And they are also independent. But INTPs are very quiet, very low profile. They don't talk. They aren't voluble like you are. You're very voluble. The other thing that tells me that you're a dominant extrovert is you are gesturing, you're moving, you're animated in your face. All of those are signs of extroversion. INTPs are much more low-key. I'm wondering, as far as I know, we don't have one in the cohort, but I can see who I would know specifically that you might know. I don't know. Do you know Zach? What's his name? Zach. Really brilliant kid. Also has had some similar experiences to you. If you were to meet Zach, he's in the PhD program now. So he's, 2 or 3 years ahead of you. But you would have something in common, but you would see that Zach is really silent, he'll sit there and watch and not say much. So INTPs don't contribute they don't like public speaking. They would never say that. They never. They do it. They can do it, but they don't like it.
Yeah, that makes whereas for me, as soon as the lights are on and I'm in front of a crowd, I actually get better.
Yes.
I don't get worse. I get better.
That's the extroverted intuition. You were energized by that extroverting.
Yes.
You are extroverting when you're in front of a group, and that energizes you, and that makes you better. I am too. I also have dominant extroverted intuition, but I have a feeling function as the second function. Wow. So less logical than you. I wish I had logic. But.
Well, I'm curious then, why does Jung keeps, in the reading that we've been assigned, he keeps emphasizing that the extrovert is like, just going along with the crowd, which is so opposite of who I am.
I think what the extrovert does is relate to the crowd. And I looked at that, I looked at that passage that you cited, and he wrote that in a 1923 essay after the book was published. And I was trying to figure out if, I thought, gee, is that true of me? Because I feel like I'm pretty off the beaten track. So I'm not quite sure how to make sense of it, but I'm gonna let you do that because you're the one thinking function. Probably find a way to make sense of it. I don't know what he meant by that. But I can tell you that for Jung, his life was very much, he was always on the journey of individuation, and he was always learning and changing, and he did develop over time, and he did have a midlife crisis, and the book Psychological Types was, emerged right out of his midlife crisis. Wow. It was actually a response to his midlife crisis where he discovered being an INTP, he was all intellect, he was all the detached analyst. And then he had this strange things happen, relationships with women that showed him, oh my God, I have a feeling function. But how can that be? Because at the time he thought only women have feeling function.
Right.
So like, and then it got even worse because he said, oh shit, not only do I have a feeling function, I've got a female personality inside me.
Right.
It's like he had this image of himself as this, very virile man, was a husband and a father of children and a lover of many women. And then what? It was like,
oh my God.
But that was the beginning. Those were the seeds of his type system. And then when he saw that, he said, oh my gosh, everybody has this. Everyone has this.
Wow.
And you have to recognize these parts of yourself and give them some expression. If you don't, they will erupt like a volcano. And
oh my God.
Breakdown. And he did have a breakdown,
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's amazing.
So his midlife crisis was a feeling crisis. It was he had to recognize his feeling function, and he writes about that in the Red Book and in other, especially letters that he wrote at the time. He's working his way through it, and then he came out with Psychological Types. And in Psychological Types, one of the brilliant things he did there was to recognize that both the thinking function and the feeling function are necessary components of judgment. That everybody uses both. You use one first, which is your preference, but then you use the other one second, and you alternate this way. And nobody in psychology recognized that until the guy's book, and I referenced it, I think, in my first module, Voice Thread. The neurologist who had a patient who was had damage to his amygdala, and he was perfectly, his intellect was working fine. He could do everything he'd done before, but his family says, but he's different. We don't recognize him. There's an alien has taken over his body. And so this guy was trying to figure out what was wrong. And then he took him to lunch. And at lunch, this man could not choose lunch from the menu. He could not decide. He could not make a decision. And that's because his feeling function was damaged. So after that, there was this understanding that both thinking and feeling are required in decision making. And there's a wonderful article called Empathy Represses Analytical Thought.
Yeah. So, that's brilliant.
Yeah. And so they showed how, okay, if you're being empathic, you can't be analytical. If you're being analytical, you can't be empathic. And this, you know, but they didn't know. I mean, Jung discovered that 100 years earlier. And it's only now that neuroscience is kind of validating that.
Well, and that's interesting too, because we have research, for example, that social scientist Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist, he says post hoc reasoning is how we justify most of our choices. So we do what we want to do, and then we come up with a rationalization for why we did it, even though that rationalization is actually not the reason that we did it. We made the decision based on what he calls intuitive feeling. We felt that it was the right thing to do. Or we felt like being a conservative was right, or we felt like voting for Obama was right, and then we rationalized it afterwards. Exactly. And so, that coincides exactly with what you said, that we don't just make rational decisions, we make feeling-based and limbic system decisions that are then rationalized after the fact.
I think Jung was the first one to come up with this idea of confirmation bias, because this is what he's talking about in psychological types. He said every person is born with this blueprint. They're either born with it or it evolves so early in infantile development that it might as well be innate. That is sort of our type profile, and that gives us a particular Weltanschauung, a particular worldview.
Yeah.
So this worldview has biases and blind spots.
Yes.
As well as assets. So it's you cannot be using one function like introverted thinking and at the same time using your feeling function. When introverted thinking is high up in consciousness, its opposite will be low, and vice versa. So he had this understanding of the functions coming up to the level of consciousness, and then others, you know, trading places like this all the time. So what happens, eventually we develop preferences. So we develop these two preferences. And that gives us these blind spots. The preferences are not a bad thing, though. The preferences are actually, he said it's actually a consequence and an important feature of civilization, the advancement of civilization. Doesn't happen with primitives. The primitive mentality doesn't develop these preferences. They don't differentiate their functions. And then the tissue between the external world and the internal world for the primitive mentality is very permeable. So they don't have extroversion. They don't develop extroversion and introversion. It's all like that. Like participation mystique.
Yes.
Term he used, or Levy.
The inner and the outer is melded together and is one big field of consciousness.
Right.
Interesting.
In the journey of individuation, the first thing we have to do is develop our preferences. And if we have a good childhood with good enough parenting, we develop those preferences.
Yes.
And then, you know, and we keep developing them until our ego is strong enough to hold our personality. And then we start to develop our non-preferences. And then the excesses of our personality begin to moderate. So everything we do, like you form a partnership with Victoria, that develops you. That develops your other functions.
You have to, that's amazing. I have a quote here from this morning. I just want to run by you and share something based on what we're talking about. Jung says, as to the individual disposition, I have nothing to say except that there are obviously individuals who have greater capacity or to whom it is more congenial to adapt in one way and not in another. It may well be that physiological causes of which we have no knowledge play a part in this, which I thought was really key, because he's so far ahead of his time now. And then if we look at the research that's coming out on the genetic basis for personality traits in predisposed tendencies, and all that means is that we're likely to act a certain way rather than other ways, like he's saying. And now we have the science that he said we didn't have yet 100 years ago, or whatever it was. And what I want to bring to people's attention at Pacifica is we should be on top of this. We should be on top of this, because now we have information that Jung wanted. He wanted this information.
Exactly. I agree totally. I think we should be well aware of what neuroscience is doing and saying, behavioral science. And but I don't know how to become more aware, except I read the journal.
Yeah, like exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I love it. And I haven't finished reading your paper. I'm very excited about it though. And
I'm afraid that my teacher thought it was a little bit polemical, but it wasn't my intention. It was.
I can't imagine your mind. Let me tell you something about ENTPs. They are debaters in that they can see every side of every issue. Mm-hmm. So somebody will say X is true, and they can say yes, X is true, but also not X is also weakly true. Right. Well, and just immediately they can see, all the sides of the issue. And
yes,
the feature of ENTPs.
Other
people see as argumentative, but they don't feel like they're being argumentative. They just feel like they're being thoughtful.
That's all it was. And I can be blunt, and
yes.
It never was my intention to hurt anyone's feelings. And I thought I was with it in the paper. I felt like I'm within like the, within the confines of academic behavior as far as what's respectable and what's not. So I struggled with the feedback, because she's saying, maybe you're focusing too much on what you don't agree with. But it's like, if I don't agree with a premise based on evidence, then why should I accept it?
Yes.
If I don't think it's true,
right?
What's the point of?
Yes.
Anyways,
that's great.
Yeah, but I think that's just part and parcel of thinking for yourself and not being afraid to say it, and not everybody's gonna like it.
It's funny. I at one point developed a bunch of T-shirt slogans for the types for a fundraiser, and the ENTP one was something like, critical thinking. It's not just for smart people.
That's amazing. I love it. Which, by the way, while you're reading this paper, if you read my paper, keep in mind, I'm not putting anything forth as if I actually know it. I'm just saying, hey, these are my questions. These are my insights. These are my issues. Here's what I think the problem with this theory is, and here's where I think Jung might have gone wrong and what he didn't have access to. But I'm not saying it's a corner on truth. I'm not saying that I could be wrong. Maybe I missed something. Maybe there's some reading I need to do to clear things up. This is how I see it now. That's all I'm saying.
That is such an interesting and telling approach, because that is very ENTP-like. ENTPs, that combination of extroverted intuition and introverted thinking makes them very experimental.
Yes.
They're experimentalists. And interestingly, INTPs are that way too. They have the same functions, just sort of. Jung was an INTP, and he had that experimental approach, He said, well, let's just try it. Let's test this.
That's exactly how I am.
And he's very leery, very wary of making any dogmatic statement ever, which is part of what makes him hard for people to read, because sometimes you just want him to just tell us, please, just tell us. But he's not going to do that. He's saying, on the one hand, there's this, but on the other hand, there's that. And he's very careful, and he really understands the trap of dogmatism.
Right.
He really understands that. And so he's careful not to fall into it himself, or tries not to. But I see that very much in your expression there. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for honoring that. I just feel it's important to nestle things within. I'm not saying this is the final word. I'm just saying this is what I've got.
So what happens, let me tell you how this comes across, because one thing I want you to be able to do when you leave my class, I want you to be able to assess the types of other people.
Sure.
And so and I can continue to assist you in that.
Cool.
As you go on. But one key to seeing the difference between extroverted intuitive types and introverted intuitive types is that extroverted intuitive types are always more tentative and more experimental. And introverted intuitive types come across as certain. Okay, they make very definitive statements. And in part, this is because, and of course, we all use both of these functions. It's just which one you prefer that makes your personality more this way than that. But what sometimes happens, unfortunately, is that people can be persuaded by the person who is certain and may not, may feel that somebody who's more experimental is less persuasive. I mean, ENTPs can be extraordinarily persuasive. And one way they do it is they often do it in a kind of a stealthy way. They use jokes.
Yes, I've been known to do that.
And they use their incredible verbal facility.
Yeah.
Like we're able to do podcasts. Nobody can outtalk an ENTP.
Right.
But it's an interesting way of distinguishing them. Now, just because introverted intuitives come across as certain doesn't mean that inside they are totally certain. It's almost more of a speech pattern thing. It is partly due to the way they think about things too. Introverted intuition wants the essence, always seeking the essence of the thing. And it wants that. The metaphor I use for the two is the lighthouse. Extroverted intuition is a lighthouse. It's sort of looking all over in every direction for whatever the new ideas are coming from any direction. Not introverted intuition is a laser. It's not accepting all these new ideas. It's going for the one thing in the distant cosmos that is, maybe the beginning of the Big Bang or something. That's how I think of it.
Wow.
So Jung says that introverted intuition seeks the archetype. They're always looking for that archetype. And so, of course, the archetype is pure, you might say. But, and so introverted intuitives don't like to have a lot of different ideas brought to them. They are very futuristic, innovative, but their insight comes from inside. And so it doesn't help them to have a lot of ideas and options presented to them. In fact, they spend a lot of time weeding them out and not listening. And so that's just a
fascinating
personality difference.
Wow, that's so amazing.
Yeah.
This has been really insightful.
Good, great.
Yeah. Do you have any books out or anything that I can put in the description so that you? I
have one coming out. And
okay. I'll be sure to announce it.
I'll send you the jacket blurb and the name of it.
Right.
It's coming out in 2021 with Routledge.
This was very helpful. I can't wait to learn more about types because this was very insightful.
Thank you. Good talking to you.
All right. Talk to you later.